My faith did not die in a library of forbidden books, nor in the cold logic of a scientific text. It died on my knees, on the cold marble of the Pope's private chapel, with the taste of fear in my mouth and a sound in my ears that was never meant for human hearing. For 7 years, my name was Brother Marco, and my life was a study in silence and invisibility. I was a papal sacristan, a ghost in the holiest of halls. My hands were the last to touch the chalice before the Pope raised it to God. My breath was the last to stir the air before the sacred rites began. I was chosen for this role not for my piety, but for my emptiness. I was a vessel of discretion, trained to see nothing, to hear nothing, and to speak nothing. The Vatican is built on secrets, but the deepest are not locked in the archives or buried in the catacombs. They are kept in plain sight, hidden in the one place no one would ever dare to question. The chapel has no grand name. It is not the Sistine or the Pauline. To the handful of us who served there, it was simply the sanctum. From the outside, it is unremarkable, a humble space designed for a humble servant of God. But that humility is a lie. The marble feels too old, its veins running with a history that seems to predate the church itself. The air is heavy, not with the sweet scent of incense, but with the metallic weight of centuries. The silence in that room is different from anywhere else on earth. It is not an absence of sound. It is a presence, a living, breathing quiet that seems to watch you, to listen to your thoughts, to judge the very beat of your heart. I spent years polishing the silver, arranging the sacred vestments, and pretending not to feel it. I learned to ignore the pockets of unnatural cold that would drift along the walls and the faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to rise from the stone floor on certain nights. I was a good servant. I kept my head down. I saw nothing, until the night I was forgotten. It was after a late compline, a private prayer for the Holy Father alone. The service was short, the air thick with a somber intensity one had never felt before. When it was over, I was collecting the cruets from a small side credence when a wave of vertigo washed over me. The room tilted, the candlelight blurring into streaks. I braced myself against the wall, hidden in the deep shadows of a 15th-century tapestry depicting the triumph of Michael over Lucifer. The Pope's attendants, moving with practiced efficiency, escorted him out. The guards performed their cursory sweep. But in their haste, in the sanctity of the moment, they missed the small shadow in the corner. They missed me. The heavy wooden door, carved from a single piece of Lebanese cedar, clicked shut. The lock, a monstrous mechanism of gears and bolts forged in the 16th century, echoed through the chamber. And I was alone, trapped. At first, there was only a cold, sharp panic. To be found here, after hours, would be the end of my life as I knew it, an unforgivable breach of the most sacred trust. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, my fear gave way to a blasphemous curiosity. The chapel at night was a different entity. The moonlight that filtered through the single high window didn't illuminate. It revealed. It traced shimmering patterns on the floor that were invisible in the daylight. It made the altar stone, a single, unadorned slab of dark porphyry, seem to absorb the light, to drink the darkness into its core. It was then that I heard it, a whisper. It wasn't in Latin or Italian. It wasn't a language at all. It was the sound of shifting sand, of a dry wind blowing through a place that had not seen rain in 10,000 years. And it was coming from inside the altar. I crept closer, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, each beat a betrayal. The sound grew, coalescing from a whisper into a faint, rhythmic pulse that I could feel through the soles of my shoes. It was a voice, yet not a voice. It was a presence pushing against the stone. And in the crushing silence, I understood a truth that would shatter the foundations of the world. The prayers offered in this room were not meant to ascend to heaven. They were meant to press down. They were a weight, a cage. The Holy Father wasn't praying for us. He was praying to keep something in. What is the opposite of a prayer? It is not a curse. A curse is still a form of speech, a plea sent out into the world. No, the true opposite of a prayer is a sound that does not ask for anything. A sound that simply is. a sound that was present before the first man knelt and will be there after the last star dies. And it was this sound, this ancient, eternal, and unholy vibration, that was now seeping up from the holiest stone in Christendom. It was a poison. It seeped into the silence, a low thrum that vibrated not in my ears, but in the marrow of my bones, in the fillings of my teeth. I knelt before the altar, the cold of the ancient floor leaching the warmth from my body, and I listened to the foundation of my world turn to dust. The whisper I had heard earlier had settled into a steady, resonant frequency. It felt impossibly old, like the sound of a star dying or a mountain being born. This was not the work of God as I knew him. This was something else, a presence that predated Christ, that predated Rome itself, a consciousness that had been sleeping and was now stirring in its stone prison. My faith had been a fortress, built brick by brick since childhood, its walls mortared with scripture and sacrament. But in that moment, under the assault of that single, unrelenting tone, the walls began to crack. My hand, trembling, reached out as if of its own accord. To touch the altar outside of the Mass was a sin. To examine it, to probe it for secrets, was a heresy so profound it had no name. My fingers, consecrated to serve God, traced the edge of the massive porphyry block. It was supposed to be solid, a symbol of the rock upon which Christ built his church. But my fingertips found a seam. It was a hairline fracture, a joint so perfectly cut and fitted that it was utterly invisible to the eye. It was not a crack from age or damage. It was a line of design. The altar was not a stone. It was a lid, a monolithic, consecrated lid. I followed the seam around its base, my heart a frantic drum against the encroaching silence. There, hidden in the deep shadow at the back where no light ever touched, my fingers brushed against an etching. It was no larger than my thumb, carved with an impossible, non-human precision. It wasn't a cross. It wasn't the chiro or the fish. It was a shape that felt like a wound in the stone. 7 lines of unequal length, radiating from a central point, like a shattered star. A memory surfaced, cold and sharp. Years ago, as a junior archivist, I was tasked with cataloging a collection of Coptic texts seized from a Gnostic monastery in Alexandria. One scroll, deemed so profoundly heretical it was said to cause madness in those who read it, was to be sealed and buried in the deepest vaults. Before it was taken, I saw a diagram in its margins, the same 7-pointed star. The accompanying text, which I was forbidden to read, was titled De Harmonia Lapidum, on the harmony of the stones. It spoke of a blasphemous science the early church had branded as magic, the belief that certain geological locations on Earth act as resonators for cosmic energies, that temples were not built on holy ground, but that the ground itself was holy because of its resonance. The scroll claimed that with the right frequency, the right vocalized tone, these stones could be made to unlock. Not with a key of iron, but with a key of sound. A horrifying realization dawned on me. The Pope's private liturgies, the specific, unwritten chants he used only in this room, were not just prayers. They were the key. A sonic key performed daily to reinforce a lock. The sound I was hearing from beneath the altar was the prisoner, rattling its bars. The chapel hadn't been built as a house of God. It had been built as a cage. My fear turned to a desperate, blasphemous need to know. What lay beneath? What secret was so terrible that the vicar of Christ himself had to serve as its warden? I pressed my ear to the cold floor, and as the resonant hum pulsed through me, I began to hum with it, turning my own breath into a key I had no right to possess. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan that shook the very foundations of the chapel, the altar stone began to move. The groan of moving stone was a sound of finality. A true secret is not a locked box that can be opened with a key. It is a wall that pretends it is not a door. And as I watched the house of God break its own laws, I knew I was no longer in a church, but in the antechamber to some other, darker truth. The massive porphyry altar did not lift. It receded, sinking silently and perfectly into the floor with a mechanical precision that spoke not of miracles, but of a technology beyond my comprehension. A darkness that was absolute rose to meet me. It did not just block the light. It devoured it. A cold, dry air, devoid of moisture and smelling faintly of ozone and dust older than civilization, washed over my face. This was not a crypt. Tombs are for the dead. This place was for something else entirely. A staircase, narrow and impossibly steep, spiraled down into the blackness. The steps were not carved from Roman stone or marble, but from a material I did not recognize. A dark, basalt-like rock that seemed to have no texture, smooth and cold as polished glass. It did not reflect light. It consumed it. I had no torch, yet as my eyes adjusted, I realized the chamber below was not entirely dark. A faint, phosphorescent blue light emanated from the depths, pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm, like a sleeping heart. Every instinct, every prayer I had ever known, screamed at me to flee, to run back to the world of light and comforting lies. But I couldn't. I was no longer a servant of God. I was a slave to this mystery. I descended. With each step, the hum I had heard before returned, but now it was clearer, purer, the source directly below me. The air grew colder, thinner. The staircase opened into a circular chamber, perhaps 30 feet across, and my breath caught in my throat. The walls were made of the same seamless black stone, curving upwards into a perfect dome that I knew, with a sickening certainty, lay directly beneath the Vatican Hill, a heretical cathedral hidden in the bowels of the holy. There were no torches, no lamps, yet the room was illuminated by a mesmerizing, ethereal glow. The source of the light was the floor itself. It was an intricate mosaic of glowing blue lines, a celestial map of breathtaking and terrifying complexity. Constellations swirled across the floor, but they were alien to me. I saw star patterns that do not exist in our sky, nebulae of impossible, fractal shapes, and entire galaxies arranged in perfect geometric spirals. This was a map of the heavens, but not our heavens. Or perhaps our heavens as they were seen millions of years ago, before the world was as we know it, before man. And in the absolute center of the map, where our sun and earth should have been, was a single terrifying symbol, glowing with a more intense blue light. My blood turned to ice. From my forbidden studies, I recognized it instantly, the ancient Egyptian hieroglyph for Saba. A symbol that means gateway, a door to the stars. The legends I'd dismissed as Gnostic fantasy, the whispers of ancient magic the Vatican had worked for 2 millennia to erase, were all true. The church wasn't just built on the bones of St. Peter. It was built on something far older, a nexus, a weak point in the fabric of reality that the Egyptians, and perhaps a civilization that came before them, had not only identified but had opened. This chamber was not a secret chapel. It was a control room. The Vatican wasn't a church. It was a dam, holding back an ocean of cosmic terror. As I stared at that glowing gateway symbol, the hum suddenly stopped. The silence that rushed in to replace it was a physical blow. It was the silence of something turning its attention to me. A consciousness, ancient and vast, had just realized it was no longer alone. The silence in that chamber was a physical blow. The sudden absence of the hum left a ringing in my ears, a hollowness in my chest. In the presence of God, they teach you there is peace. But in the presence of whatever slept beneath my feet, there was only a crushing, absolute silence. The silence of a predator that has stopped breathing so it can listen for your heart. And in the center of the room, standing on the very glyph that depicted the Stargate, I saw it. I hadn't noticed it before, lost in the spectacle of the floor. It was a pillar no taller than my waist, made of the same seamless black stone as the walls. And on top of it, resting in a simple cradle, was the source of it all. The lock, the key, the weapon. It was not a holy relic as we knew them. There was no gold, no jewels, no sign of reverence. It was a staff about 5 feet long, crafted from a wood so dark it seemed to have been petrified from the night sky itself. It was unimaginably ancient. The wood felt hard as stone, yet it emitted a strange, almost organic warmth that pulsed against my skin even from a distance. The length of the staff was covered in carvings, a chilling tapestry of forgotten languages. I saw the sharp, angular script of Sumerian cuneiform, the elegant loops of pre-dynastic Egyptian hieroglyphs, and symbols from the Indus Valley civilization, all interwoven with geometric patterns that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves if I looked at them for too long. This was not the work of one civilization. It was a legacy, a baton passed through the dark corridors of forgotten history. At its top, the staff was crowned not with a cross, but with a crystal. It was uncut, roughly spherical, and had a cloudy, milky appearance. But as I watched, it seemed to be clearing. The smoky inclusions within it swirled, as if awakening. It was absorbing the faint blue light of the chamber, and I knew, with a certainty that froze my soul, that it also absorbed other things. Prayers, faith, penance, hope, the focused psychic energy of over 1 billion Catholic souls, channeled through the papal office and this very chamber, day after day, century after century. The crystal was a capacitor. The staff was an antenna, and the entire, magnificent, global edifice of the Catholic Church, its rituals, its masses, its network of belief, was the power plant. On the curved walls of the chamber, faint etchings began to appear, glowing with a soft, hungry red light. They were illustrations, warnings. I saw images of the staff being used to open the gateway on the floor. I saw beings of impossible geometry and burning light stepping out, not as saviors, but as architects of reality, reshaping worlds with sound and thought. And then I saw a different scene, a catastrophe. The gateway out of control, the sky tearing open, cities turning to dust, humanity enslaved not by demons, but by their own creators, being so far beyond us that our existence was less than that of an ant to a man. The final panel was the most terrible. It showed a group of robed figures, priests from a dozen forgotten faiths, their faces etched with both terror and resolve, holding the staff together, forcing it into the gateway as it closed. Their bodies were consumed by a blinding light, a final, desperate sacrifice to seal the door. The Church hadn't suppressed this ancient magic out of fear of heresy. They had inherited the duty of the survivors. They had built their religion on top of this cosmic wound to ensure no one could ever pry it open again. The Pope was not a messenger of God. He was the eternal jailer, and the staff was the lock on the cell of gods. A soft sound from above broke the spell, the scrape of a shoe on stone. My blood ran cold. Someone was coming. The most terrifying men in the world are not those who hunger for power, but those who are utterly enslaved by it. I saw the truth of this as the Holy Father descended the glassy, black staircase. I flattened myself into the shadows at the edge of the chamber, my body a knot of pure terror, praying to a God I no longer understood. The figure that entered the chamber was not the confident pontiff the world saw on the balcony of St. Peter's. This was a man stooped and frail, his face a mask of profound weariness, the weight of his office a visible, crushing burden on his shoulders. This was not a man coming to pray. This was a man coming to perform a terrible, necessary duty. He moved with a heavy, practiced slowness, stopping at the bottom of the stairs to survey the chamber. His eyes, for a moment, seemed to pierce the very shadow where I was hiding, and I felt a wave of pure psychic force wash over me, a silent, powerful command to not be seen. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart seizing in my chest. When I opened them again, he had moved to the center of the room, standing before the pillar and the staff. He did not kneel. He stood straight, his hands clasped behind his back, and looked down at the glowing glyph of the gateway. And then he began to speak. It started as a low whisper in ecclesiastical Latin, a familiar prayer of containment, a plea for protection. But then the language began to shift, to decay. The soft, melodic Latin syllables flattened, hardened, taking on the guttural, rhythmic cadence of a language that had been dead for 4,000 years. He was speaking ancient Akkadian, the tongue of the Babylonian exorcists. I recognized fragments of it from the darkest, most forbidden sections of the Vatican's library on demonology. He was not praying. He was performing a binding. As the dead language filled the chamber, he reached out and placed his hands on the crystal atop the staff. The moment he touched it, the star map on the floor blazed with a fierce, angry red light. The crystal, which had been milky white, turned a deep, bruised purple, and the hum returned with the force of a physical blow, a sound of rage and immense power pushing up from beneath the floor. The Pope's body shuddered, but he did not pull away. Veins stood out on his neck, his knuckles white as he gripped the staff. This was not a ritual of reverence. It was a battle, a raw, violent struggle of will between one man, backed by the focused faith of 1 billion souls, and a consciousness trapped on the other side of the gate. The Pope was a conduit, channeling the raw psychic energy of the Church into the staff, reinforcing the lock, pushing the presence back into its cage for one more day. He was sweating, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the dead language pouring from his lips in a torrent of power. I saw then the terrible, hidden truth of the papacy. It was not a throne of glory, but a sentence of servitude. Each pope was chosen not for his holiness, but for his strength of will, his capacity to stand as the warden of this cosmic prison. For centuries, this silent war had been waged in secret, beneath the feet of the faithful. The Church did not fear science because it disproved God. It feared science because it might one day rediscover the principles behind this terrible technology and, in its hubris, try to open the door again. After what felt like an eternity, the red light on the floor receded, flickering out like a dying ember and returning to its passive blue glow. The crystal faded back to white. The Pope collapsed against the pillar, exhausted, his duty done. He was not a king. He was a keeper, and I had just witnessed the secret that held the world together. The Pope's exhausted form, slumped against the pillar, was the last thing I saw before I turned and fled. He had won the battle, but the sight of him, a frail old man holding back the tide of a cosmic ocean, offered me no comfort. It was a vision of a world held together by a single, fraying thread. And I, a ghost in the machine, had just seen the scissors. Terror gave my limbs a strength I didn't know I possessed. I moved like a wraith, back to the staircase, my bare feet making no sound on the glassy steps. I didn't dare look back. I could hear the faint, measured footsteps of the Swiss guard from the chapel above, their patrol coming to ensure the seal was secure. Theirs would be a swifter, more final kind of judgment. As I reached the top, the great porphyry altar was already slowly rising back into place, sealing the chamber, sealing the truth, sealing my damnation. I slipped through the gap just before it closed, the soft click of the lock sounding as loud as a thunderclap, the final closing of a door on my life, my faith, and my soul. I hid in a dark confessional booth until the first rays of dawn pierced the stained glass windows, my mind a ruin. Everything I had believed was a lie, a beautiful, magnificent, and necessary lie constructed to shield humanity from a truth it could not bear. I escaped the Vatican that morning, melting into the river of tourists, a nameless man stripped of his God, his purpose, and his identity. I took nothing with me but the memory of what I saw, and a small, hastily made charcoal rubbing of the 7-pointed star from the back of the altar. It is the only proof I have. It is my curse. I am telling you this now because my time is running out. I have been in hiding for years, moving from city to city, haunted by the low hum I sometimes hear in my sleep. But they are hunting me, not the Italian police or Interpol. The agents they send are quiet men in plain clothes who carry no weapons but have an aura of ancient authority. They are not hunting a heretic. They are hunting a liability. They are hunting the keeper of a secret that can no longer be contained. I have started to see things. I see the symbol of the 7-pointed star appearing in strange places, in the geometric designs of new corporate logos, in the patterns of emergent technologies, in the graffiti on city walls. It is an echo, a resonance. The seal is weakening. I fear the energy that feeds the lock is failing. The collective faith that the Church so carefully cultivated for 2 millennia is fracturing. In a world of science and cynicism, the psychic well is running dry, and the warden's strength is fading with it. The prisoner in the earth is beginning to stir. The Vatican knows this. Their frantic push for global unity, their strange new public interest in astronomical phenomena and extraterrestrial life. It is not about salvation. It is about desperation. They are trying to find a new power source, a new way to reinforce the dam before it breaks. They are afraid, for they built a global religion not to enlighten humanity, but to harness it. to turn our souls, our devotion, our very hope, into a raw energy source for a lock on a cage holding back our former masters. We have been kept in a state of spiritual infancy, our true history erased, our potential shackled, all to keep us from ever remembering the languages of power, the science of creation that could reopen that door. They did it to protect us from a power we could not control. But their protection is failing. Soon the hum from beneath the stones will be heard by everyone. Soon the door will open, and the beings the Egyptians called gods, the architects of our reality, will return. And they will not see us as their children, but as their escaped property, a power source that has been left untended for far too long. So when you pray to your God in your church, your mosque, or your temple, I need you to ask yourself, what is the true nature of your faith? Is it a key to your liberation, or is it just another bar on the cage?